Then in like 30, 40 years when like the children have grown and we're all in like our rockers just like pissed off, like 2020, the year COVID struck. It was all downhill from there.
Back in my day, we didn't even have masks around.
They're gonna have like some cool ass like cyberpunk fucking shit by then, and we'll be like, we'll have like a case of memories with like our little paper masks, like, oh, look at these.
That's gonna be in a museum.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm thinking this is gonna be like a medical fashion show where people judge these like ultra, like you said, right, like ultra cyber futuristic masks, but then they also judge it by its like quality to like remove air pollution and all that shit. So it's like, ultra sustainable eco shit that's gonna be like dank as fuck, and you're gonna look good and you're gonna feel good because it's actually super fresh for you. So, oh my god, here's to a future without COVID. Fuck. Right? Yeah, we're supposed to record.
We're supposed to be talking about a human on human crime.
Yeah, but I don't know. I'm probably gonna cut in somewhere from minutes ago, and then I will say, instead of kicking off this episode with a war on disease, we're supposed to be talking about a war on our fellow human beings within the world of crime and murder and all that dumb shit. With that being said, welcome to Kanpai Chronicles. Yokoso Kanpai Kronicles. Bloody hell! Welcome to the show. I'm gonna be fucking it up every single time. The show with the good, the bad, and the yabai with your hosts Norman and
Holly.
Yeah, and in this episode, we're going to be talking about the bad parts, or the bad side, the dark side of humanity, where instead of, talking about all the good stuff that Japan has to offer or society has to offer, we're going to take a look at why they made a movie about the Joker's origin story and figure out the wonders of crime, the wonders of murder, and maybe what compels people to initiate that, whether if it's a one-off thing, whether it's if it's a shock event, a trauma, or maybe if it's whether it's a lifestyle, because that's a possibility as well. I guess I just wanted to start off this with our usual thing, before we dive into all that deep, dark, bloody shit.
Yokai baddies.
With our yokai of the week.
Was that my turn? I pulled one up.
I believe it is your turn. Yeah, because I did.
Nice.
I think the last episode is the watermelon monster. So Suika Bakemono, I think that's the name. But I believe it is your turn. So with that being said,
before I pop into my little yokai, I mean, obviously, like, it's probably, what's the word? Not intended. Whatever. It should be assumed that this podcast might have like sensitive content if you're still listening. So if that's not your thing, probably don't listen to this one. I'm not sure how far it's gonna go and what we're gonna get into, but our sensitive listeners might not like it. But anyway, the yokai of this week, I just randomized and I got the Dai Tengu. Tengu, typically, from what I've seen them, because I watch like a lot of anime, are like these hotties with wings. But
they're hot
and they're like sexy. Tengu are like my roommates bought this like manga set about this like just hot fucking Tengu, and I was like, whew, reading this. But and then I think anytime I've seen them in certain anime, they're hot. But typically I think they're more supposed to be these kind of like monster looking things, but across all boards they have these like really big like angel like wings. And I just landed on the Dai Tengu, and honestly I kept it on the first shuffle because the picture, if you pull it up, is like the Dai Tengu like meditating under a waterfall, and it just made me think of like hot waterfall daddy from when we like first started talking about yokai. So yeah, Daitengu, which translates to like greater divine dog. And Tengu, at least in stories that I've seen, are pretty like humanistic. So typically they'll have like societies and like their own, individual names and identifiers and stuff. And so the Daitengu, which separates this apparent species from other ones, is that they are more, do I want to use maybe so like religious? They typically kind of go for like a monk aesthetic. And it says these ones have like a red face and like a phallic nose. Which I think you see that mask a lot also, like in anime, like a red Tengu mask with like those long noses. I think those are technically supposed to be like representative of like Dai Tengu. And these ones, like a lot of Tengu will eat like humans and stuff, but apparently because of their like monk sort of aesthetic, the Dai Tengu, they have certain preferred foods and they go on like kind of a strict dietary regimen. And for their behavior, it says Dai Tengu live solitary lives on remote mountaintops far removed from humanity. They spend their lives meditating and just kind of like perfecting themselves. They have great pride, wisdom, and power. And it mentions that like Kotengu, which is supposed to be like a lesser form, more like animalistic type of Tengu. But it also notes that because they are more wise, with more intelligence, it also makes them a lot more dangerous. And it says natural disasters and other great catastrophes are sometimes attributed to the powers of the Dai Tengu. But they also have more self-restraint. So they're perceived to have a little bit more of what we would consider like humanity. And let's see, how do they interact with people? It says her interactions, while Kotengu terrorize people whenever they can, over the centuries, Daitengu were viewed less as an enemy of mankind and more of a race of godlike sages living deep in the mountains. Daitengu became closely connected with the ascetic mountain religion of Shugendo. The mountain mystics grew close to the Tengu, seeking their wisdom and worshiping them as divine beings. It is perhaps through this mystic religion that humankind was eventually able to earn the respect of the Tengu. Brave men ventured into the unknown wilds in hopes of gaining some of the Tengu's wisdom. Occasionally, Tengu would teach secrets and impart magical knowledge to the worthiest of these men. And then it goes on to say one of Japan's most famous warriors, Minamoto no Yoshitsune, supposedly learned his swordsmanship from the Tengu king Sojobo. So yeah, humans and the Dai Tengu can sometimes share tea.
This is some major anime shit right here. Like,
yeah, I'm like
right?
thinking, I can't remember the name of it, but I feel like I started watching an anime that had those like worlds like interconnect, but I can't remember what it was called.
I'm getting like parallels of like multiple sources. Like even before we talk about the history, there's like normal Tengu, and then there's cool Tengu, and then there's Dai Tengu. It's almost Pokemon like. It's just like, oh, it's like evolution and all of that shit.
Right.
Or Digimon, right? It's just like different alternatives. And I guess the way that they built this is it's almost like some kind of like martial arts anime where someone is just going through this journey to self-improvement, and then they find this like sage in the mountains, and then it turns out, oh, they're not actually human, they're demons. So you learn about their wisdom and all that shit. That's pretty sick. Honestly, this is like probably the most badass description so far we've had on the show, because this feels like, what's the word for it? This feels like a yokai whom we are able to communicate with if we encounter them, and given the right conditions, we won't die.
Yeah, you can also, because I feel humans, we always want to like see ourselves in other things. And I feel like the yokai that we've talked about so far, this is the most that like you could potentially identify with. Because humans too, or if you're into like psychology and all that stuff, we are also supposedly always fighting all of these like natural animalistic urges. So when you have something like powerful and godlike like this Tengu, who could just snap off and do whatever, but they try to like practice certain like restraints and religion or spirituality or things like that, very much the same as like people do. So it's something we can kind of like look up to and try to relate with, I suppose.
Yeah, it's also very human. And we've talked about this before in the previous yokai, where there is that side of humane yokai where humans themselves are a kind of demon that would make us very scared, because we sort of know what they're capable of doing. So seeing a human with that hesitation would compel them to be like, oh, this one can murder me, right? I think the slit mouth girl for the Halloween episode, like, it's just a woman, but then like they look human, but then they're capable of killing us, like that sort of thing. And in this case, we see one in human form. I don't know how they're going to kill us, if they're going to resort to their savagery. Maybe it's just like a freaking spirit bomb or some shit, or some like Dragon Ball thing. Oh yeah, Dragon Ball was the thing I was thinking of. It was like Goku goes to the mountains and gets like some kind of like secret superpower, or like Yu Yu Hakusho or something like that. It's just like,
I've been rewatching that.
There's this like master god demon that lives in a secret cave. You have to go and find him. It almost feels like that. And to me, like, if I were to be in a timeline where Dai Tengu exist, not that I'm saying they don't exist right now, I mean, you never know, but like if there is, or if it's at least prevalent, right, I would probably make the journey to go to a mountaintop and then learn more.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But
If I lived in a time where, I mean, who's to say I can't? But like if it was easier, I suppose, to like fuck off and be like, I'm going to go into the mountains and just work on my aesthetics. Absolutely. If there were like Tengu and shit out there that I knew of, and I'm like, I'm gonna find this. Let's do a spinoff podcast where we're like yokai hunters. And we'll just go. We'll just take some equipment, go out into like the mountain and film shit.
That could be a YouTube show. So like, we'll just have it on the YouTube channel and be like extra footage. It'll just be like,
do you think you could find funding for that? If I was like, all right, after COVID's over, I want to like get some money to go do like research out in the mountains of Japan, find Tengu or other yokai.
would you be genuinely interested? Because this is like
no, I would absolutely, yeah.
Paranormal, yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, let's. I'm gonna write that idea down, because I don't mind. I don't mind doing that, because might as well, right? At this point, like, if we're gonna die to Tengu, might as well die together. Like, I think it'd just be pretty funny, or at least get good footage.
Yeah, and at the least, like, you're still exploring like the culture and things like that. And Japan has been wanting to get people out of the city and more into the countryside again. So we could make some highlights.
Yeah, but not to get us killed by a demon that has a dick for a nose. Like,
I have no regard for my own safety. Yeah. So you can like be the voice of reason, while I'm like, look at this rickety bridge. I bet Tengu is on the other side.
What's that meme? It's like the demons at 2 a.m. Hey, it's me, your boy.
That's me. Like, you're just trying to film and like put together a good show, and I'm like, hey,
I'm
Just
just
kind of fuck shit
recording.
up.
The summary of the show is basically me going, Holly, no, and then you're just like, what's this? It's just every episode. It's just...
All right, now write it down. Let's figure that out.
I've got it. I've got it down. I've got it down. We can figure it out. Oh my god, it'd be so funny. I'll just write that line first. Holly, no. Okay.
Holly, no. No, okay,
right.
But yeah.
Okay, so this greater divine dog. What tier would you put this? Because this is a fascinating one, because it can kill us, right? It can, but does it want to? And I don't know if that plays a part in your shall we say, yokai criteria of you judging it.
If we're like still kind of going off of like like more like horrifying, I would put it maybe in like an A or B, just because like, and again, this is just my perception of it, but like it doesn't innately seem dangerous. Like I wouldn't see this and be like, I'm like gonna fucking die. Like I might not be horrified, but it has the capability. And like as the thing was saying, like it can even supposedly cause like natural disasters and like catastrophes and stuff like that. So it has the ability to do all of these things, but perhaps seeing it doesn't have the like horrifying shock value. Okay, I'm gonna backtrack, because that's just me. I feel like maybe like normal people might see it like this red-faced winged thing and be like horrified. I don't know, probably like A. Maybe A.
Yeah. I would put it around A as well, because this description, I'm having trouble a little bit, because this description involved explaining about Tengu in general, and then the smaller, weaker, maybe more barbaric cousins, Kotengu, and then we have the Daitengu, which is, I guess, the end result or the final goal of every Tengu, what they're trying to achieve. This some kind of like wisdom or transcendence or something like that. A lot of the description contains stories of Dai Tengu specifically helping human beings. So there is this possibility of harmony and peace. And that was what brought, at least my thought in the beginning, my score for Dai Tengu to be like B or even C, just because you're able to communicate at first glance. It's not like our S tier yokai where as soon as you see them, you're dead. It's not like that. Like you have no hope, right? But the thing is, they are capable of causing catastrophes. Yeah. So there's that rationale or that reasoning, and that in itself can be dangerous, because they can rationalize destroying humanity, or they can rationalize causing tsunamis or whatever it is, or they can just spawn more waterfall daddies. I don't know, right? Like it's like it's like if someone, it's a bit like that discussion of, if we were to meet extraterrestrial forms, do we assume that they are going to attack us, or do we assume that communication is the first thing that we should seek? I forgot what it's called. What was it, like Dyson levels or something? I forgot. There's a term to describe the level of civilizational progress for a species, to see if they are capable of doing like interplanetary travel or like space or anything like that. But then when we meet another species of a different level, we view them differently. And if they are a lower level than us, we are more than likely to want to conquer them, attack them, and basically not treat them as equal. And in this case, if Daitengu are so strong and powerful, what's going to stop them from like just wiping out everything on Earth? I mean, after thinking about it through that way, yes, I feel safe meeting one, but
Hmm.
then the possibility of them like, wreaking havoc, which would put it up to A.
Yeah. Which I didn't really think it would go this way, but like, what a great transition into our topic, because isn't that the same for like meeting people? Like, you can meet like another human and you just never know. Like, you have no fucking idea, like,
Yeah.
oh, what this person is capable of, what they're going to put you through. Are they a good person? Are they a bad person? And so, yeah, that's what we're going to talk about today. Did you have any leading ups to some stuff that you found out?
Well, I wasn't really sure how to actually lead into this,
Mm,
because I feel like when we start talking about crime or murder or like bad stuff, I think one way to look at this is to look at the humane aspect and then see how we ourselves explore that, if we even have a relationship like that with these kinds of aspects. I'm thinking about like relationships with violence,
mm,
compulsions, um
mm-hmm,
how we rationalize ourselves from like not committing a crime, or like
mm,
how we stop ourselves from wanting to like kill someone out of revenge or out of anger, right? Things like that.
mm-hmm.
And then try and figure out if that is applicable in a Japanese context, or even if there is none, then sure, that's fine. But there's probably going to be something out there for us. I found a few, but I would might as well just ask to you directly. Hmm, how do I word it? How do I word it without sounding like an asshole?
Just
Have
be a
you ever?
dick.
Yeah, just be a dick. Yeah. Have you ever just thought about just committing crimes growing up? Like not like full on like can get go to jail or anything like that, but like from growing up, do you ever just thought about just doing bad things and just wondering why don't we just do that, or why don't we just do this?
I still think that. Like, I feel as I was like leading up and like thinking about what I was going to talk about in this podcast,
Yeah.
um, I am a little like nervous because this also is going to explore like make me look at the darker parts of me. Um, and I'm
Yes.
like, damn, am I like what do I want to say like out loud? But no, the way in which my mind works, um, I think about that stuff all the time. Because can I'll probably say this a lot if we explore like certain cases. Um, I can, for the most part, understand why someone might commit a crime and do certain things. It doesn't mean that I think that that's okay. Um, but from a psychological standpoint, I can understand factors that might lead up to that. I can also accept that we don't even have the fucking beginnings of understanding of the human brain and what makes it think and act in the ways that it does. So it's hard, like that kind of stuff, at least for my brain when I'm trying to like rationalize things. Sometimes I think we just don't know and we have to decide like, is this like hurting too many people and we can't, accept that. When I was younger and I didn't, 'cause, when you're younger, you're typically more like impulsive. You don't
Yeah.
have that much regard for like others. When it came to like petty things like stealing or whatever, lying, stuff like that, I didn't consider that stuff bad. Maybe it's just like the environment that I grew up in or whatever. I found that certain crimes, petty crimes, can be pretty easily like justifiable. There was a time I think I was 11 where I did consider something like pretty bad, like really bad. Of course, I didn't like act on it, but and so maybe maybe that's why I can like understand in certain situations what might like push people to do So maybe not like mass murder, but like an emotional killing, perhaps. Like when people like kill in the moment of like pure rage or like something like that. I could understand like how those feelings like might pop up. But what about you?
Yeah, this is yeah, I'm also dancing with words as well because
Yeah, I'm like, fuck.
so yeah, if you're listening right now, we are trying the best to make sure we're saying something where we don't want to be incriminated or whatever. So yeah, take all of this as hypothetical because we're only discussing. So yeah, unless stated otherwise. Yeah, this is a complicated topic for me because I was in leading up to this episode, I was thinking about this because I suggested the idea on like just murders or like crime stuff, and it's fun to maybe look at case studies of things that actually happen in Japan, like as an example, like planning for it. As I was researching, I was like, why do I like reading up this stuff? And was there ever a similar case that happened nearby me or like throughout my life? Because I lived in different places, so maybe that's different cultures, different contexts, etc., to consider. But I think for me, I grew up subjecting to my desires and impulses very easily. Like I'm very, very easily influenced by the people around me. Well, not by the people around me, but rather just my environment in general.
Yeah.
Like if there's like a pretty simple one is greed. Like if there's a lot of snacks on the table, I'm gonna eat all of them, right? That's a very simple example, right? And that's a
Right,
very
right.
true one because I was a pretty fat shit like when I was young. But the more alarming one was that I was a very angry kid when I was young. Um, I was in a lot of fights in primary school with other kids. Like, we're not talking about like, oh, you dumb, you stole my pencil. No, no, no. We're talking about like punches and kicks. Um, actually, like getting called into principal's office and shit like that. And I grew up, and then I moved to Holland, and I matured a little bit better. But the anger wasn't really tempered. It was more like, this is my process for making sense of the situation in which I am emotionally charged. I will respond in this manner, and it just happens to be this short-tempered willingness to say want to punch the other person for saying something racist, as an example, because that's happened multiple times growing up, or making fun of my name, or bullying, right? Things like that. But then when it came to crime, I had invasive thoughts that I rationalized with that same thinking pattern. So I rationalized it as like, oh, the world is not giving me what I want, so I will do this out of revenge. Like theft, or even something even more drastic. There were some times that I got in trouble because of that. I don't think I should share it here, but that kicked my ass. As a result, and I thought, okay, I shouldn't be doing this anymore. But in reading up about couples arguments and them murdering each other, or someone shooting the rapist of their daughter or something like that, or an arsonist, or a mass murderer, or even a shooter or something like that, and then you read up their backstory and you read up their frustrations. All of a sudden, I do not agree with their actions, but I do empathize with what compelled them to do so, which is very difficult territory to tread upon, because even bringing something like that up, which is, the sentence itself already sounds pretty controversial. Even bringing something like this up is going to be difficult to circle around and share this opinion with other people without any of us in this conversation to be emotionally charged, and then that leads to miscommunication, because most of the time miscommunication seems to be, or distance even, seems to be one of the largest factors in something violent happening. And
Mm-hmm.
when we try to discuss this on neutral grounds, sometimes just one word off and punches will go
Yeah.
flying or blood
Yeah.
would spill. So it is a very complicated relationship. And I'm not gonna say it's healthy at the moment,
Mm.
but I gotta say it's healthier. Like it's
Yeah.
healthier. So similar to you, like I still have those like thoughts coming into my mind. But I'm happier that I'm in a place where I can process it better so that I don't become subject to my own impulses, like whether it's violent or physical. So
Well, and again, like super like sensitive and stuff. Um, but I feel like because I'll watch a lot of like crime documentaries and like listen to the podcasts and do all that sort of stuff ever since like I was really little. And so I think that ability to recognize those thoughts that you have, if you have them, hopefully is like a fairly like decent tool to kind of like keep you on track, because typically if you notice something within yourself that makes you uncomfortable, having that awareness hopefully is what can keep you level ground. The thing that scares me, I think, how do they kind of like talk about it like a trigger, like something in your life, big or small, can be like what sets you off. And so I'll have a scary thought from time to time because I've experienced like my fair share of trauma. That when you go through trauma, things in your brain are literally like changing. That stuff affects your psyche. I don't know if I think I've briefly mentioned this on the podcast before, I don't care, but like the last time I was in Japan, I went through this sort of like assault situation, and since then I have noticed in regards to certain things, I have a lot less tolerance. If I hear a certain story about someone going through something similar, or even for a while afterwards when I was like hyper like traumatized, I had like a lot of just bad thoughts in general about men as like a whole. And so since that, I have noticed like my thoughts in regards to certain subjects will go a lot darker a lot quicker. And so I'm like, oh man, like how many more traumatic events do I have left in me before I like fucking pop off the edge? So stuff like that is scary. Like I think like when you kind of have like that awareness and you kind of feel like, and not only do you have to be aware of like what everybody else has going on, but you have to be like aware of yourself. I find that very uncomfortable. But then on the same respect, I feel like it does allow a lot more sympathy and empathy for others, because I can understand how things affect me and how I feel and how I think, that I think even if in general on a surface level I'll say things like I don't fucking care about people, I do genuinely want to be kind and support other people, because I know that all of us we're going through our own shit. When I see someone that may be acting strange in public, initially, of course, it does garnish like a response of like, oh, like what's kind of going on over there? You get a little bit on edge, but I feel have more acceptance of it than most people do, where I can kind of be like, well, you don't know why this person is acting out that way. You don't know what they have been going through. And I feel a lot of times when people are that worked up, especially in public, they probably just need some assistance. And I think that's an unfortunate thing, and especially in Japan, the isolation and the separation. I think it plays a role creating people that feel so pushed to the point that they go out and they commit these bigger crimes.
Yeah. It's the dark side of creating a culture built for harmony, is that sometimes that harmony is in a very strict, rigid definition, and it doesn't really fit everybody. So
Yeah.
we have a fragment of the people living in such cultures that are outcasted or ignored, just because that they've done one thing differently, and it's not wrong. It's just differently,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's just absolutely no support system
Mm-hmm.
to help them get back on track. And this is when these things start to happen. Definitely one of the things that helped me with recognizing and, shall we say, separating my actions from my violent thoughts was the support system. Like, was the constant active effort to want to be in an environment built on kindness, which was
Mm-hmm.
really, really great. And also in an environment built on empathy, because I needed that to be in a place with different cultures. And also, if like, because I think after Holland, I came back, I went to boarding school, so you're just gonna be with people all the time. Like,
Yeah.
you can't help but be with, like, friends in the same room or the same house or whatever. And we're all just trying to keep each other, like, alive and surviving, and going through high school together, which meant that when it came to processing such heavy thoughts and burdens, or when confronting desires or wants that are definitely not accepted by law, you don't have to make the decision on your own to proceed with it. Like, you can always seek counsel, you can always seek guidance through other people, and that was what really helped. A number of people who are compelled to commit such crimes, like specific crimes in question,
Mm-hmm.
are so alone that their thoughts just become echo chambers of nothing but such violent thoughts, that they just can't help
Mm-hmm.
but, like, they didn't even think that saying no was an option. Like, all they heard was
Mm-hmm.
just yes in their own
Mm-hmm.
voice. And this is when, like, things like these can happen. I mean, it's really shitty that it happened, but when you backtrack the thinking patterns, it's possible, and it can happen.
Yeah.
And I feel like it can happen to the best of us. um
Yeah.
and in Japan specifically, yes, we have these outcasts to consider. And even like, I'm reading some of the news on my screen right now, like, and even some who seem like they are functioning members of society, they're still going to be like this, and it's like a dark side that they're
Mm-hmm.
hiding away. So those who
Mm-hmm.
are essentially abusing their position, it's a possibility as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, with that being said, let's talk about the Joker killer, because I feel like that's going to be the most relevant one. That's
Oh,
that's
the recent one that just happened.
the Halloween one. Yeah,
Yeah.
the
Okay.
Halloween one, because this is the exact perfect example of what we're talking about. So, a few weeks ago, I met up with a Japanese guy here in KL. So shout outs to you, Hibiki, if you're listening to this episode, because I introduced him to Kanpai Chronicles. So, uh, so yeah, so shout outs to you, Hibiki-san. We were talking about this exact thing. We were talking about this Joker killer. So, for those of you who don't know, during Halloween in 2021 in Japan, a few weeks ago, there was a man in a Joker costume who sprayed flammable liquid all around a train carriage and set it on fire, and was essentially attacking passengers with a machete or a knife or something like that. And 17 people were injured as a result. Um, a lot of people thought it was some kind of Halloween stunt, but then he was brandishing a long knife, and this was on a proper station, and people had to get out. And I'm seeing pictures right now. People had to climb out of the windows of the train carriage to escape this criminal. This is this is a BBC report, and it says, quote, the NHK news agency quoted police as saying that the man had said he had wanted to kill someone since June because he had quit his job and seen many of his friendships fall apart. Added that he dressed like Joker because he looked up to him, and this is what he. Yeah, okay. And then another sentence says, local media reports say that the suspect told authorities he wanted to kill people so he could be sentenced to death. Now, this is a. I'm gonna link this article in the show notes, of course, for you to read. And there's a video of the actual attack. So viewer discretion advised. I'm also gonna put a big warning in the beginning of this episode, even before we started, so that we make sure things are okay. So me and Hibiki-san talked about this actually while we were having lunch, and he said, if I remember correctly, that this was a person who had lost his job, like had a lot of things happening to him, and he couldn't recover, and he felt like he was being left behind. So the both of us were talking about different ways to determine what will compel someone to go through this. And my thoughts on it were that he was so desperate to survive in such a rigid society that he needed to make a mark, even if it was a horrifying one.
Mm-hmm.
Because functioning as a normal human being within that context proved to be impossible for him, because he tried to, even after he was, fired or whatever it is. And for him, it was something along the lines of his circumstances just weren't taken into consideration when the context was being built. Like, as soon as your context just isn't aligned, you're just thrown
Mm-hmm.
away, and people
Mm-hmm.
resort to crime, and or even worse, murder or attempted, to make yourself relevant or to try to survive or try to live to the next day. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it was a pretty interesting conversation, a pretty alarming conversation, of course. And I guess it speaks to the friction a human being can receive even in their place of birth, and their expression of it through violence, which is a very, oh God, it's a very powerful but dark thought to have.
Yeah, I was talking about this with my friend Michelle after I saw some of the videos were popping up on like Twitter. Then you have the whole like discourse of like, oh, don't talk about this because you're just giving the person attention. But then at the same time, if you don't talk about these things, you can't reflect. When I look at cases like this, I think something that is really missed and not highlighted enough is the question of like, really why? When people ask why did someone do this, they focus so much on like the individual and wanting to break down the individual's life, and be like, oh, all of these reasons, and then also paint them as like a really big villain with all the blame because they've done something so horrific. To do stuff like this is unjustifiable. I don't think you should ever go out and do these kinds of things, but I think it's also important to be aware of how we as a society contribute to this. And especially I feel you can see it a lot with the whole pandemic situation. My mom used to live in Las Vegas, and it's a city. All cities have, their crime, especially in the States. But once the pandemic hit and so many people were losing their jobs, and on top of that, you're losing your job, you're losing your home because you can't pay rent, you can't afford to feed your family. We had little to no like government assistance, and we also don't have very many systems in place that help people in general. So my mom, almost every day was telling me about, things that were happening, shootings that were happening, crimes that were happening, stabbings that were happening. robberies, XYZ. And she just said, constantly, like all the time, like bad things are happening in Vegas now. She's moved now, which I'm grateful for. But when you have people that are in such desperation, sometimes I think that triggers a probably survival instinct, to be honest. You enter into like a phase of desperation and your rationale isn't necessarily working the same. Sometimes I think there are people where it's still rational, like with this specific person in this case. When I saw that, their end game was, they wanted to do something so bad so that they would be put out of their misery, essentially. We have cases like that here too. I think we call it like death by cop or suicide by cop. Or some people, and again, the wording is going to sound weird. I don't mean to, I'm not trying to make light of this, but it's the only way I can think to phrase it. Is some people, they can't do it themselves. They can't put themselves like out of their own misery. They can think like, I want to die, but taking that next step and actually doing that themselves to themselves, they can't. But the will to not be existing anymore is so strong that they want to find another way to do that. And I feel the easiest way is to have the authorities do it for you. Because I've even had thoughts of like when I'm like super stressed about my life and I'm envisioning like my future, like living out of my car or something. I'm like, oh, I could always just commit a crime that's not horrific, but bad enough, like trying to rob a bank or something, where I'll be put into prison. And then I don't have to worry about it. Everything, I have shelter, I have food, and it may be rough, but like I got the bare necessities. So with people that are in that kind of sheer desperation, again, I don't think I could ever do that next step. That's the part where people lose me, but I can understand the emotions and the thought process that sort of gets them there. After the movie Joker was released, I was telling Michelle about this, I was surprised that a lot of things didn't get chaotic after that. When I went and saw that movie, I was like, things affect me emotionally, like pretty intensely. For like a good 2 weeks after seeing that movie, I was like fucked up because it's so true to the darker parts of society. So it doesn't surprise me that is the person that they chose to like identify with in that particular point in their life. Yeah, I was just going off.
Would it surprise you if I told you I've never watched the Joker movie yet?
Actually, yeah. I am surprised. I feel like that's something that you would be into. I was hesitant on seeing it, but because the Joker already is a character that I find like pretty fascinating. And so when I was seeing the trailers for this movie, I knew exactly the route they were going. And I knew, I was like, psychologically, this is going to fuck with me. So I was hesitant to go see this movie. I always think about rewatching it. But then I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah. I'll watch it. And it's just I'm just not bothered to go to like cinema and all that. So that's actually the main reason why. It's not like I have like a dislike for it.
Well, it's been out for a few years now, Norman.
Really? I thought it's like just like last year or something. Joker movie.
No.
Oh, 2019. Holy shit.
Yeah.
Oh fuck.
We're in a time hole. We're in a time.
Sorry,
like I still think it's like
it's my perception of time. Holy shit. Wow, I thought it was like last year or something. Okay. Anyway. Well, fuck me. I need to get the movie then. Okay. Yes, the point on just planning out a crime just to get shelter. I've read about that. Was it in Norway or Holland? There was like an old man who took out a knife and tried to rob a convenience store or something, but then in a very desperate manner, because he was just getting the cashier to call the police so that he can get arrested because he didn't have a home. And it was like, it was almost, no, not pathetic isn't the right word. Is tragic. It's just really tragic that
Mm-hmm.
someone is just pushed to the brink of, oh, I'm also a member of society. Um I've been doing good work, and then something happens, and then now I'm just cast
Mm-hmm.
away. Why
Mm-hmm.
is it that I have to be bad so that I can be just the same as everybody else again? And
Yeah.
it's like there's a system in front of us, and we know that there's good stuff within that system, but we don't have an entrance, so we like blast open a hole in the wall to go in, like make our own entrance. And
Mm-hmm.
of course, for them, it's like, nope, that's not the right way. So we're gonna be punished for it. Um, and
Yeah.
and punishment, like the concept of punishment, then becomes abused in a way where it is seen as something that is being sought after because
Mm-hmm.
that's how bad the situation is for the person. That
Mm-hmm.
like for this particular person, this Joker killer wanted to be arrested or wanted to cause chaos just
Mm-hmm.
because the system has failed him. So he decides to express that frustration out, and has caused harm to multiple people,
Mm-hmm.
which brings up the question, the relationship between punishment and recovery for a person. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and from the context or from the angle of incarceration, because I haven't really looked at it that much, although there are some like absolutes where I'm from. So being in Malaysia, we have like standard governmental law, but then we also have Sharia law, which is
Mm-hmm.
the Muslim specific Islamic law. Um, I'm not sure if it applies to me, like any form of Sharia law. I don't think it does, but please don't quote me on that. But
Mm-hmm.
there are things like capital punishment, like
Mm-hmm.
grounds for execution, which I think isn't common around the world. I think there are countries where there is no such thing as immediate execution. But like here in Southeast Asia, you have, like in Malaysia, yes, we have Sharia law. And then in Singapore, any form of drug is an immediate grounds for execution. I believe so.
Shit.
Yeah, because Singapore is a lot like really, really strict. Like having chewing gum is like a $200 fine. Like that's an example, right? It's like
Mm.
they have to, right? Given the limited resources, they have to be super strict with this kind of thing. So as soon as you have something like, illegal contraband, it's just grounds for firing squad. Like it's just things like that.
Mm.
Whether it's incarceration or whether it's penance, whether it's going to jail, uh, spectrums of punishment are broad. But to be honest, where I'm from, I don't really hear that much about recovery programs. It's almost
Yeah.
as if anyone who doesn't agree with the notion of harmony within that context doesn't deserve a second chance. And to me, that sounds
Mm-hmm.
really sad. I've seen it, in other countries, like European countries and in Australia as well. And, there's crime everywhere, of course, but at least there's recovery programs and like rehab and also support systems.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, what have you noticed about like how people view punishment or how people try to navigate through that?
Because I've had a lot of conversations, especially after most states here, like weed is, legal now for use. Um, so that brings up like a big conversation about, people that are in jail for possessing or selling marijuana.
Yeah.
Like, should not, in my opinion. But the question is like, oh well, shouldn't they like should they be there? And obviously, like, no, because like, what the fuck? But I've thought a lot about like rehabilitation programs and how important I think they are because again, a lot of times I don't think a lot of people want to commit crimes. You don't like, obviously there are some people that do, but in general, people are just trying to live. And you see such a shitty like circling of events. Part like I spent a lot of my time in like the fucking ghetto and hanging out with, little like kids. Like I was just a kid at the time. You have kids and teens and stuff who are, already like selling drugs and stuff like that because that's what their family has to do to get by. And so someone goes to jail for drugs, that's on your record. So what you get released and you can't get a job because you have a record. So in order again to take care of yourself, take care of your family or whatever, you're selling drugs again. And, it goes round and round and round. And if you are in specifically the types of environments that I'm a little more familiar with, you do things like join gangs and stuff like that because you need a support system. And depending on the type of people in this group that you join, in order to be a part of that group, you have to do what that group does. And that's, all different levels of stuff. If, you were arrested for something and you get brought in and they actually fucking learn about you, like, why are you doing this? Blah, 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 blah. And then they put you into some programs. Like, I hate here, I don't know how it is in other parts of the world, but you hear a lot like in America, they'll pick like the one poster child of like, well, this person, grew up with this background and blah, 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 and they did this. That's not normal. Like, that is fucking exceptional. That's like amazing for them. That's awesome. That's cool. But to put that expectation on everybody growing up with that same background, that's fucking absurd. Like, the rarity of that, like, that's not common practice. And I think it's just so sad that people don't want to fucking help other people. Or there's the cases where someone is fucking drunk. It's 2:00 in the morning. Unbeknownst to them, they're pissing in a bush next to an elementary school. Nobody's there. Like, it's the middle of the night, but cop is just happened to be on patrol and sees you. It's like, boom, you are a sex offender now. That sucks. You're put on these lists. People can see that about you. There are situations where I feel call for some leniency. And I can't remember when it was, but we were talking about the anime Psychopaths. They kind of go into that like a little bit, where they have these machines that can like read someone's like psych level, and if they're like a threat or not. And typically, like when they'll arrest people, they'll go into like a treatment to see if their like levels can, And I do think if there was more support, not only after a crime has been committed, but before, because a lot of stories you'll see like the warning signs. People often, I think, don't commit a crime until they've exhausted like all options. You see that in the movie Joker as well. The whole time, like people will be confessing how distraught they are. But no one really takes it seriously. It's kind of like, oh, well, it's normal to feel that way. Oh, well, what are you going to do? Whereas there should be more things put in place where, oh, you're struggling with housing or you're struggling, finding a job. Here are some resources and places that you can go that'll really take the time to help you. I think that would cut back crime so much. Just having the fucking human decency to hear someone out and be willing to help them and give them the resources that they need.
Yeah, compelling someone to help out is one of the most difficult things ever. And I think it was, I forgot the name of the phenomenon. Is it third person observer? I think that's the word for it. It's that event where let's just say that a blind man is walking in a train station and he is lost. He needs to go to an escalator, a specific one. People passing by him ignore. Like they recognize the situation, but they're not willing to help. They're willing to observe because they think that, oh, someone should help, but then it's not going to be them, etc. So they are third person and they're just observing. It's almost like this. It's almost like there's this giant wall of hesitation and they are protected by that wall, from the perspective of, oh, yes, I do feel that these people who are in need of help should get help, but it's not going to be me. Or like they should be fine. They should just Google it on themselves or something like that. But there is something very powerful about even just reaching out with a simple message saying, hey, you look like you've been through a lot, struggling a lot. I found this, maybe it might help. What do you think? Or like, oh, my house is open for you to, crash a few days in for a while or something like that. If you need someone to talk to, or if you need me to drive you to the hospital, if you need to go to the hospital, or if you need me to bring you to rehabilitation, right? Or something like that. Like these are small favors, but they incur such great kindness and possibilities just for the person. That reward is so hidden because we don't really see that, right? And it's only such a small percentage of the world is going to be willing to even do that without seeing any expectation in return. It's just like, hey, you seem like you need help. Let me help you. Just no need for thanks. I'm just really feeling your situation. The thing is, when you look at the ecosystem of all these people living together in a country, these systems are formalized and inducted by like government or by public institutions, etc. And when they fail, so do the amount of options available for the person. And so they resort to crime, they resort to options. But then we also have that hidden layer of, oh, if the systems that are documented or formally provided for me will not help my situation, the next thing I do is the people around me. The system that I invented for myself, which is my friends, my family, which, connecting back to what you were saying about how people may find systems and supporting themselves through gangs. I think there was an interview of an ex neo-Nazi who was trying to explain the rationale behind why these young kids join such radical groups in the first place. And it's because they found bliss and solace in the support systems provided within that community. It wasn't about like they weren't attracted to the hate. They were attracted to the available warmth and love that these groups were able to provide. And then in order to sustain that relationship, they resorted to furthering on the ideologies of the specific groups. Hence the continuing of hate from the group as a system. Oh, sorry, no, hate from the group as an entity, but not necessarily hate for themselves. They just do it to belong. And that desire in itself, right? It's like a synonym for survival. Like I want to survive, like in current society today, in order to survive, I must belong. Like the connotation of must there is really powerful. And if you have given me the rules to belong and I have failed those rules, what should I do then? I must find a way to invent my own way of belonging. The first way is to try to seek help from friends, but if that's not enough, or if I'm not compelled to reach out, because that's also another thing, right? The person is also must be willing to reach out. We can't impose. We must suggest, and encourage, but we cannot impose.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, that's
Mm-hmm.
just controlling them.
Mm-hmm.
They must be willing, and then their closed ones or their social locus is willing to encourage them, like willing to, like it's like making sure your arms are always open for a hug. Like you're
Right.
not forcing them into a hug, but you're like, hey, if you want one, my arms are
Yeah.
open, right? It's just like that. Like, I will hug you if you want one. Like, it's just
Mm-hmm.
making sure that that chance is always open. Having that level of, it's not empathy. Empathy is part of it.
Compassion.
Yeah, compassion. Yeah, that's a good word. Yeah, having that level of compassion, and it's not even a high level amount. It's just like the
The
minimum
bare minimum.
understanding.
Yeah.
Yeah, bare minimum, right? Having this bare minimum level of compassion from the individual self, and slowly but surely teaching that to people all around, so that we can start to look at people not just as, oh, your actions, but rather your circumstance,
Mm-hmm.
then gives us the opportunity to reach out and say, hey, as much as I do not agree with your actions, I still believe that your potential towards a positive direction is still there. It still exists. And maybe currently you may be blind to it, or
Mm-hmm.
currently, even though you notice it, you might not be able to like reach out towards it. But let me help you.
Yeah.
Maybe I can't provide everything, but let me help you at least take one step forward. Let me, like, pat your back while you take one step forward, and let me be just for this one moment, um your cheerleader and supporter. And I think this is when we get, like, those people who help on suicide watch, or like they save people who jump off bridges, etc. Like it's
Mm-hmm.
almost like that, right? All they needed was a voice of reason and a voice of compassion. And
Mm-hmm.
if that compassion can be packaged into formal systems as well, that'd be great.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes we see that fail, not only in Japan but in everywhere else around the world.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard. It's a lot of rules and gray areas, and even
Mm-hmm.
if you try to create ideal laws and regulations, it's there's going to be some
Yeah. One
extreme cases,
one
etc.
yeah, like one way, like your intentions can be all for the best, but one way is not going to work for everyone.
Yeah.
And I think that is one of the hardest things about trying to have a whole, society, basically, because there's always going to be those outliers. And it's like, where do you make exceptions and where do you not? Because if you accommodate one person from the rule, then how many other people do you need to accommodate for different rules? I can understand when you get to like dealing with legal things and stuff like that where it gets complicated. But also on the other hand, like I also feel like it's really not. Something I've been working my mind around actually this semester in school is how humans label and like categorize things. Um, we have this, in my opinion, kind of weird tendency to want to put everything into boxes. And once we think we have defined and labeled a box, we think that everything needs to fit into that. Like if it looks like it, then it is. And that's just not true. Everything I feel like should be dealt with individually as an individual case. But I don't know, humans just don't work that way, I guess.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about that. Maybe I was writing notes on that like last year or something. I I want to build on that, on a theory for that.
Hmm.
Is that the human being's capacity for exceptions is limited, which is
Mm,
why we simplify our
mm,
understanding of the world by labeling and categorizing. Because as much as I can say like, oh, I am a heterosexual Asian man. Okay, great. Does that mean that my behaviors are subject to the same behaviors as every other heterosexual Asian man? No, right? Because there are exceptions to my behavior. There
Mm.
are differences. There are unique characteristics. But then most of the time, labels and categories, we believe in them because we assume that the definitions associated with these words deal with a large amount of data. Like
Mm.
it just easily blanket explains everyone that falls under this label or category. Uh, but like, I mean, obviously you and I know like there's going to be exceptions. There's going to be very big
Mm.
differences, and there's going to be a case by case basis. Like just because I believe in this one definition doesn't mean that if you also follow this one, you're going to be exactly what I think that you're going to do, right? Or think
Mhm.
or act or whatever. But the reason why then that we categorize anyway, despite knowing that
Mhm.
this is a possibility, is that our capacity to take into consideration what could potentially be different is limited. And even in this sentence, it sounds a bit flawed because the word limited is then defined by each and every person's ability to limit that amount. Like maybe for us, we've known so many different kinds of people, so it's not as limited. Like we can cater for exceptions, definitely. It'll be like, oh,
Mhm.
um from the gender spectrum to pronouns to tendencies um to even conditions or even walks of life or whatever it is, right? Or even differing opinions, even, right?
Mhm.
Like that's just something that just people have. um our capacity to recognize, accept, and to navigate through that can differ from person to person. And to put everybody on a neutral field, labels and categories end up becoming the de facto solution. But
Mhm.
then that's also kind of painful because as soon as you're a little bit different from what dictionary.com says about you, you're like, oh shit, do I belong to the human race? Damn.
Yeah.
It's just like, what the
My
fuck?
my
Like,
daily question.
yeah, right. Like, am I a human being or am I actually like a cockroach or something? Like, I don't know, right?
Fucking
Like, it could
lizard
be,
person, yeah.
yeah. Am I just a dickhead? Like,
Yeah.
so it's difficult,
Mm.
right? It's
Yeah.
difficult, and then what happens then is it's hard to talk about case by case basis for larger scale situations.
Mhm.
Things like incarceration and punishment and law. This one rule is supposed to be a blanket rule for any present trial as well as incoming trials from there on. And then lawyers are built to be like, hey, we're gonna like memorize the entire history of law in this section, like this region of the world, from like since Jesus or whatever the fuck, like since
Mhm.
civilization started up until now. And then we're gonna make connections, and then we're gonna use that to argue with the present time so that that can become material for a future time where someone can be like, hey, this exact situation is coming up, but let's just use the previous rationales to make it easier. Because there's also a logistics problem to catering to a case by case basis, which then just increases the complexity of all this shit. So like, anyway, basically all I'm saying is that when we start thinking about, okay, how do we care for the people who uh, got fired from a job in Tokyo, or moms who worked but then they got a kid and then they're unable to get a job again. They can't get back into the corporate world because they have a child to take care of, which is actually a very alarming issue in Japan as well. How do we
Mhm.
care for that? How do we maintain or create policies that allow them to enter the workforce in a healthy manner, um, without compromising any of their current situations and assets just because uh, just because of their circumstance, right? It's like things like
Right.
that. The big one here is oh God, how do I word this without sounding like a dick to governments? Um, what is the most effective way to listen, to adapt, and to reiterate quickly and effectively over current case studies without being too stuck on past definitions is the big question here. Like what you said, right? Like you mentioned in the US, weed is now legal in the US, but then we still have a lot of people incarcerated on possession of weed. But it doesn't make sense. Why is it that
Mhm.
weed is now legalized, but then this exact thing that's now legalized is not being applied to the ones that are jailed? So why is
Mhm.
it that they're not taken to retrial or reconsideration there? Like, so that question ends up becoming like the big thing. And
Mhm.
I feel like not only that capacity for exceptions is limited, but maybe even for larger entities, the capacity for readjustments or retrials is also limited, and that honestly breaks my heart, like really,
Yeah.
really bad.
I feel in some situations it probably just boils down to kind of like what you were saying about how some people have a very limited capacity on really what they can think about, and a lot of things where it's like, oh well, how could we help people, how could we have justice, how could we blah blah blah. People maybe could have like a general like idea, but then maybe like when you go to like, okay, how would we put that into action, maybe they just don't have answers, so then they just don't. Which in my day to day, I can feel that. When I go to like do shit that I need to do, sometimes I just don't know how to execute. And so I just don't do it. But then sometimes, like even with the people that are in charge, it's case by case because you have a lot of people that are just shitty fucking people. What money are people gaining from having certain people be in jail? Or do they have racial biases and things like that? Like when you were talking about like employers, for example, I feel they tend to work on a bias. It's like maybe they hired one mother who, had a baby and now she's trying to go back to work. And maybe their experience with her was that she had a hard time handling both, which is completely just, completely fair. Um, so from an employer perspective, that wasn't reliable. That was a problem. So now they just peg any mom to be that way. And they're like, we're not going to hire moms now. Or so, like currently for me, um, since I was diagnosed with autism and I've been trying to figure out how I can be honest with myself and future employers about that, I think a lot of places don't want to hire people that have um, disabilities. And then you get into situations where it's like, okay, what they really don't want to do is they don't want to accommodate people. They want everyone to be able to work on the same level, like no stress, not having to give any extra. But then you have companies that have really great people who are like, no, we want to welcome all types and we want to meet you where you need to be met. So like it's like I do generalize in that sense where I'll be like, oh, there's no like hope for my future because people are this way. When really like that's not true. There are, always exceptions. And so I have tried over, the past year to really like hone in on that. And then in terms of like groups, maybe I'm backtracking a lot, but you were talking about people wanting to join like communities and stuff just to feel like protection and things like that. And so something that I had going through my mind a lot last year in school was when I was like writing about cults and stuff. When you're like studying religion and spirituality and things, it's like there's all these definitions and everyone defines things differently. And so for me, I'm like, well, how are people defining a cult? And most commonly, it's like more along the lines of a like religious or spiritual practice that just so happens to be harmful. But then it's like, well, we will look at traditional religions like Christianity, and that's not called a cult, but based on a cult, various like cult definitions, people have done a lot of fucked up shit, like in the name of God. So in reality, can't we call everything a cult then? But people are like, no. And a lot of people, I think, like once you're told something and you're like, no, this is a fact, a lot of people don't question it. And they're just like, oh, yeah. You don't see the issues that arise from that. Like I think I've talked about in a couple of podcasts just because that was like what I researched. But it's like you have this group of people who joined this group because they weren't finding the support and compassion that they needed within their own society. And yet they're all demonized for things that really a select bunch in the group did. It doesn't mean that all of that group is bad, but they are now like extremely like villainized, like in Japan. And in my personal opinion, it's like, well, if these people that were committing the crimes that did were already people that felt outcasted by society and wanted to get back at society, how does it make sense that you're going to take the rest of the followers that had nothing to do with that and villainize them more? You're just going to like recreate the same scenario. And it's sad.
It's almost a tragic cycle, really.
Mhm.
And not to repeat myself, but I feel compassion is one of the best ways to break that cycle, or at least
Mm.
introduce an alternate route for people who are stuck in that flywheel of despair. Most of the time, I don't think the people who are committing crimes have the desire to commit crimes. They're not just like, hey, I feel like being a murderer today. It's not like that.
You're
It's,
right.
it's more like, I mean, there's gonna be some people that are gonna be like that, of course, exceptions, remember, but like
Mhm.
there, but a lot will be, it will be more on, I seek a hand to guide me, and it just so happens to be in this direction. So, whether it's timing, whether it's availability of support, um, whether it's even access to support, uh, whether it's the cultural implication, um, or whether it's their circumstance, all of a sudden, if all these things are, they are in the right, if they're set in the right orientation, this person can either be someone who can recover from their situation really well, or they can just turn to crime because there's just no other way. And it just seems like an escape, like an out, like
Mm.
it's like I'm tired of the shit kind of decision to be made. And we want to make sure that people don't even consider that as a route in that flywheel. And
Mhm.
the only way to do so is through the most immutable and atomic medium that everybody is interacting with, just to even be part of society and to be relevant to
Mm.
society, which is conversations, right? It's just like, oh,
Mhm.
what are the conversations that you are having with yourself in the mirror and with the people around you that are compelling you to not to frame it as to not do crime, but more like to set you in the right direction slowly but surely and making steady
Mhm.
progress, so that when you take steps backwards, because it's not going to be an easy like, step 1 to step 12 you're going to be fine after. You're going to have some fallbacks, of course. When you do take steps backwards, you don't give up immediately.
Yeah.
Like it's knowing that even if you do mess up one day, we will still wait for you to try again and take another step forward. And that's when, you know yes, some cults happen to be in that position to provide that for some people, and
Mhm.
yes, some fictional figures happen to be in the right place in the right time, to inspire
Mhm.
someone to take action. But we should be doing the same in terms of impact, so that they can also be inspired to do something good instead of crime, and also to provide them with other tools that they need, other things that they require, so that they can, get up on their feet and start again. So the more that I'm thinking about the word crime, the more that I am finding it difficult to provide words for the topic, because I don't want to, because I feel like I'm generalizing a little bit from just now. Like I don't want to generalize the notion of every single situation, because some can be just from purely evil people, and some
Right.
can just be out of desperation. And generalizing as a tool, as a method, is actually a very good tool to have, but it's an incomplete tool because of
Yeah.
its lack of consideration for exceptions. So
Yeah.
don't
You need
depend
to
on
be,
just generalizations.
yeah, you need to be open to the possibility of exception. Generalizing isn't necessarily like bad in some cases. That's how, we survive. But people should have an open mind. You can't just hate or villainize, everything just because you're generalizing. You need to know that there are exceptions to the rule, both good and bad, because you do see a lot of probably categorized as like naive people getting into some bad situations because everything is good and peachy in their eyes, when sometimes the situation calls for a little distrust. If we it'd be kind of interesting maybe if we did other episodes where like we just take one like prominent case or something and talk about it and just analyze that specific person and crime. That'd be kind of cool.
Oh, right. That's actually cool. Like
Mm.
it could be like some famous criminal or something, or like some famous
Mm.
Yakuza boss or some shit. Like it's
Mm.
just all about this one. Okay. Let me
Mm.
write that down. I would want to dedicate episodes to like a very, very specific thing,
Mm-hmm.
because our episodes so far have been
Pretty in
on
general.
yeah, on umbrella topics. So like
Mm-hmm.
we can go pretty broad, but I think it'd be pretty cool to start exploring
Mm.
specifics.
Mm.
We'll see. And for anyone listening, if there's anything that you'd like us to talk about, like whether it is a prominent case, whether it is
Mm.
a crime that maybe you'd never forgive. Like there are, like for me, like as much as we've been talking about compassion, I feel like if I've been put in the position where I should be forgiving someone for doing something, there are going to be
Mm-hmm.
things that I just cannot forgive them for.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
like I don't know, like murdering my family or something like that. Like, oh, okay,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, sure. Like all of my logic says to forgive them, but they should be careful. Like it just have to be. I don't like the one thing that I'm worried about, and this is tracing back to my childhood. I was a very angry kid
Mm-hmm.
and getting into fights and stuff. And there were even times like just like recent years that I might get into potential kerfuffles with people
Mm-hmm.
or strangers or something, whether it's an attack or whatever. I'm not afraid of that actually blowing up. I'm actually afraid of who I will be or what I will do
Mm-hmm.
in that situation when I'm like pushed
Mm-hmm.
past the edge. Like what you said, like if there's a trigger that's just going to
Yeah.
make me switch. I
Yeah.
because I've passed that before and I really hate that part of myself. So I
Yeah.
really want to make sure
Yeah.
that like yes, I will push for compassion as much as possible until the end of my life. But there are going to be things that are just crossing the line. So we'll see.
Yeah.
It's still going to be something for me to learn as a human being.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right. We are coming up on time, but in the realm of crimes, in the realm of violence, in the realm of our coping mechanisms for that, or our ways to stay compassionate despite these situations coming up. Is there anything else that you want to share? Otherwise, we are good.
I don't think so. Nothing that wouldn't like spark me on another like 20-minute ramble.
I had one more question. I don't know if it's even a good one, but like since I brought up my end of the answer already, are there, like we've been talking about compassion, forgiveness of these people in their desperation, are there situations or crimes where if you were to take a look at them, you would just never ever forgive them or never ever show any compassion?
Crimes against children are probably like my number one. I can never understand that. And then obviously, like you said, like if it comes to people that like I care about, that would probably be like my end all. Um especially if you were to like witness something like that. Like if I were to like see someone like fucking murder my sister in front of me or something, like I feel something like that would be the, you know, those movies where the person's like out for fucking revenge. I feel like that would become my life. I would be like lose my fucking mind. But yeah, there's, I don't know, like I don't even necessarily think you have to forgive people for like what they've done, like for like in general. Like if someone like stole a bunch of money from me for some reason, maybe I found out that there someone in their family like needed a medicine or something. There's a very justifiable reason that they took this money from me. I could understand it and I could be compassionate about that, but it doesn't mean that I'm going to forgive what that, you know, put me through, for example. I don't think you have to necessarily accept something as being okay to still have like compassion about it and to understand where that person was coming from and what they were going through.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. I might have been like blending it in too much. But then I could just be doing that out of rage. If it's something I can't forgive, like it's just like, oh, you know, like at that point, like, you know, past the point of no return, I'm not really attempting to rationalize whether I agree or disagree, or I'm willing to do a discussion about the crime in itself. Like it's not about that at that point. I'm probably thinking about other things, as what people would say, stooping down to their level. But you know, but these are all hypothetical, of course.
Right.
For now, we try our best to be just and proper human beings. Hopefully accepted and welcomed by our respective communities. Not too ousted, just a little bit of yabai here and there, but legal yabai stuff, so it's okay.
Yeah, yeah. Be yourself,
yeah.
without crossing a certain line.
Yeah. The Yamanote line. Anyway, yeah. With that being said, well, we'll stop it here for now. I think one thought or one prompt for anyone here listening, if you're watching this or if you're listening to this, I would love to hear, maybe in the comments below, is there anything that you would like? What's the extent of which you can forgive and you cannot forgive? I would love to hear that, because we've been talking about this extensively, and crimes has such a great broad definition, and it would be great to hear what everybody else thinks, because bringing this up for discourse means that we can learn from yourself and and your experiences or your thoughts, or maybe if you have anything you like to share, like an article or whatever, can add to our understanding. We can even bring it up in a future episode, so I think that'd be great. But for now, that's all for this episode. Thank you so much for listening. As per usual, you can always just like and subscribe and follow us in your favorite podcast listening app, whether it's Spotify, etc. Which is a quick note, more and more people are listening to Spotify, which is on us on Spotify, which is great. That's pretty cool. So shout outs to everybody listening on that app there.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I don't know how to look at stats for things, so I'm just
Oh, I have access to it, but like I can.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's it for now. Thank you, and we will see you being yabai as usual in another episode. So bye bye.
Bye.